You walk into a room, and the atmosphere instantly thickens into a toxic, invisible fog. You haven't uttered a single syllable. You haven't flexed a muscle or demanded an ounce of attention. Yet, as your boots hit the floor, you can feel the microscopic daggers of 1,000 unspoken judgments piercing your skin. It is a cold, suffocating weight, a localized weather system of hostility that seems to follow you like a haunting shadow. You look around the perimeter and see the faces of the silent jury, individuals who offer a smile that doesn't reach their ears and a gaze that feels like a forensic audit of your soul. You've done nothing wrong. You've maintained your integrity, you've cultivated your garden, and you've moved with a quiet purpose that the world usually claims to admire. And yet, there it is, the unearned hate, the inexplicable, jagged resentment that hums in the air like a high-tension power line. This is not a misunderstanding. This is not a temporary friction of personalities or a simple case of bad vibes. This is a declaration of total war, a biological, psychological, and spiritual conflict occurring in the deepest, most primitive trenches of the human ego. Welcome to the laboratory of the human condition, where we are about to perform a brutal, high-definition autopsy on why the radiant sun is so often attacked by those who have grown comfortable in the damp shadows of the cave. We are not here for platitudes. We are here to decode the engine of envy and understand why your excellence feels like an existential threat to the architecture of the ordinary. To understand why the unshakable monolith, that version of you that refuses to bend, is suddenly the target of the collective pack, we must map the geopolitics of the internal state. Since the dawn of the species, the human mind has operated as a status-seeking supercomputer, a biological machine programmed with one ruthless directive: survival through relative position. When the high achiever enters the frame, you don't just bring your talents, you bring a mirror, and for the vast majority of the population, looking into that mirror is a traumatic experience. We are witnessing a tectonic shift of social comparison theory. In the primitive theater of our ancestors, being at the bottom of the hierarchy wasn't just a blow to your feelings, it was a death sentence. If you weren't the strongest, the fastest, or the most resourceful, you were the first to be sacrificed when the predators breached the camp. This ancient biological manifesto still screams inside the modern skull. When someone sees you, the orchid, blooming with a terrifying brilliance in a field of grey weeds, their brain doesn't see a friend. It sees a breach in the security system. Your discipline, your peace, and your refusal to complain act as a silent siren, alerting their subconscious that they are falling behind in the race for relevance. They don't hate you for who you are. They hate you for the mental glitch you trigger within them, a glitch that forces them to realize they have signed a peace treaty with mediocrity, while you chose to remain on the warpath of growth. This is the Cold War of the soul, where your personal evolution is interpreted as a hostile invasion of their comfort zone. Let us look deeper into the gasping engine of the human brain, where the gears of resentment are lubricated by neurotransmitters. Neuroscience reveals a terrifying narrative. For the envious spectator, your gain is literally processed as their physical pain. Within the machinery of the mind, there is a specialized circuit known as the reward center, and right next to it lies the pain registry. Research shows that when the architect of chaos watches you succeed, their brain doesn't just feel annoyed. It fires the same neurons that register a physical blow to the solar plexus. It is a neurological abysses where the ego attempts to protect its own structural integrity by attacking the source of the discomfort. We find here the Schadenfreude circuit, a dark, obsidian corner of the mind that finds a twisted, dopamine-fueled pleasure in seeing the fallen titans stumble. This is the reason why, when you face a setback, the wardens of the sidewalk are the first to offer a performative "I'm so sorry," while their internal chemistry is throwing a victory parade. They need you to fail so that the internal pressure gauge of their own inadequacy can finally drop back into the green zone. They aren't looking for justice, They are seeking biological relief. They want to drag the high flyer back down into the mud so they don't have to endure the exhaustion of trying to reach your altitude. It is a systemic sabotage fueled by the desperate need for self-preservation. If they can convince the world and themselves that you are arrogant, lucky, or manipulative, then they never have to face the devastating reality that you simply stayed in the kiln longer than they did. We must now address the scythe of the mediocre, a phenomenon known across the global landscape as tall poppy syndrome. In the great garden of conformity, there is an unspoken, ironclad law. All flowers must be the same height. If one poppy grows taller, if one stem reaches closer to the sun, the others do not celebrate its majesty or seek to learn from its strength. Instead, they call for the executioner of the status quo to bring the shears. This is the cultural trench war of our era. We live in a society that claims to worship excellence in its marketing, but secretly enforces the average in its reality. The silent fortresses, the individual who refuses to dim their internal light, is seen as a rebel against the order of the ordinary. When you refuse to participate in the gossip circles or the pity parties of the uninspired, you are essentially declaring that you belong to a different ecosystem entirely. This terrifies the predators of status. To them, your refusal to play small is a geopolitical threat to the social fabric they've woven to hide their own lack of initiative. They will label your confidence as hubris and your boundaries as coldness. But let the fate observer tell you the absolute truth. The height of the poppy is never a crime. The dullness of the blade is the true tragedy. You are being trimmed not because you are flawed, but because you are too much for a world that has been conditioned to be too little. Peer now into the cinema of self-loathing, the psychological mechanism we call projection. Think of the envious spectator as a malfunctioning projector in a darkened theater. They have a film running constantly inside their mind, a grainy, painful loop of their own missed opportunities, their own cowardice, and the potential they buried in the backyard years ago. When they look at you, they aren't seeing a human being with a story. They are seeing a blank, white screen. They take all the toxic waste of their own internal failures and project it onto the canvas of your life. If they hate themselves for their own laziness, they will call you obsessed. If they hate themselves for being spineless followers, they will call you unreliable or difficult. If they hate their own inability to speak the truth, they will label your honesty as aggression. You are merely the sacrificial lamb for their own unhealed shadows. This is a global defense system designed to keep their ego from collapsing under the massive weight of its own regret. It is infinitely easier to burn down your sanctuary than it is to rebuild their own crumbling foundation. You are living the life they were too afraid to even start. And every breath you take is a vibrating reminder of the engine of destiny they let rust in the rain. Your very existence is a psychological breach in the fortress of their denial. But what happens when the atmospheric pressure of this collective hate becomes a crushing force? How does the unshakable monolith stand firm when the tectonic shifts of social rejection threaten to swallow the ground beneath them? You must come to the realization that their hate is not a critique of your character. It is a biological confession of their own limitations. It is the most honest feedback you will ever receive that you have successfully exited the safe zone of the unremarkable. You have become a landmark in the fog, and landmarks are always the first to be lashed by the gale force winds. The moment you stop seeking the validation of the wardens of the sidewalk is the moment you reclaim the fuel of your sovereignty. You do not owe the world a curated performance of your pain just to make them feel comfortable. You do not owe them a dimming of the sun just because they forgot to bring their own light. The fate observer commands you to look at the internal machinery of your own worth. Is your value determined by the pollution of the crowd, or is it forged in the white-hot kiln of your own conscience? The great divorce from the need to be liked is the moment of birth for the God mode of human psychology. When you finally realize that their vitriol is actually a monument to your achievement, You no longer fear the daggers. You start to appreciate the desperate craftsmanship of those who throw them. As we descend from the summit of the soul and look back at the battlefield of the human ego, we find the ultimate, crushing epiphany. The Fate Observer has watched 1 billion stories exactly like yours, across the span of time, and the pattern is as ancient as the stars. The orchid that survives the winter of resentment becomes the legend of the next spring. Your light was never intended to be a universal comfort. Some people have lived in the damp darkness for so long that the mere sight of the sun feels like a physical assault on their senses. They are not necessarily evil in the cinematic sense. They are gasping for relevance in a world that is accelerating past them. Your mission is not to cure their envy. Your mission is not to provide an itemized explanation for your light. Your mission is to shine with such a relentless, unbothered intensity that you provide a lighthouse of possibility for the other silent fortresses who are still cowering in the shadows, waiting for permission to stand up. If your excellence blinds them, tell them to wear sunglasses. If your peace disturbs their chaos, tell them to go find their own silence. Never, under any circumstances, shrink your soul to fit into a room that was built to house ghosts. Your success is your biological manifesto. It is the living proof that the engine of destiny can still roar in a world that prefers the muffled whisper of the defeated. If you have ever been the target of unearned hate, if you have ever felt the scythe of the mediocre reaching for your throat simply because you dared to be better, tell us your story in the comments. We are turning this digital space into a sanctuary of the radiant, a stronghold for those who refuse to play small just to satisfy the predators of worth. The laboratory is closing for today, but the reconstruction of your spirit has just begun. Go out and be the radiant sun that the world is too afraid to acknowledge, but too mesmerized to look away from. Here is your final, soul-searching question for the Fate Observer's eternal records. If you were to extinguish your own light tomorrow, just to blend into the shadows of the crowd, who would be left to prove to the next generation that greatness is even possible? Class dismissed.